Don't eat that, sir. Black girl WARNS billionaire, and exposes his maid. The fork never made it to his mouth. Victor Sinclair, a man worth $4.2 billion, a man whose name sat on the side of 3 buildings in downtown Manhattan, was about to eat a dessert that would have killed him in 40 minutes. The table was set with bone-white china. The chandelier above threw gold light across the crystal glasses, across the untouched bread rolls, across the faces of 11 dinner guests who were laughing, drinking, not watching. But she was watching. Maya, 8 years old, wearing a blue dress with a velvet collar, her hair natural and full around her face, sat perfectly still at the far end of the table. Her small hand shot out and grabbed Victor's wrist. Not gently, hard. Don't eat that, sir. The table went quiet. Victor looked down at her hand, then up at her face. The girl wasn't frightened. She wasn't performing. Her eyes were locked on his with the kind of certainty that lives only in people who have already seen what's coming. He laughed, the kind of laugh a man uses when he needs the room to laugh with him. Nobody laughed. Because across the room, standing very still beside the kitchen door, Amina, the woman who had served this household for 6 years, had gone completely white. And what Amina knew in that moment, what she was desperately hoping nobody else would see, was already unraveling. If you've ever been the only person in the room who saw what was really happening, keep watching. This story is for you. Amina Diallo had been invisible for so long she had learned to move like air. She arrived at the Sinclair estate every morning at 5:47 a.m., not 5:45, not 6:00, because the coffee had to be ready before Victor came downstairs at 6:15, and the first morning it had been 3 minutes late, he had said nothing. He had simply looked at the mug, looked at her, and walked out. That silence had cost her more than any raised voice ever could. She was 34 years old. She held a degree in hospitality management from Spelman College that sat inside a folder inside a storage unit in the Bronx, because the year she graduated, her mother's dialysis bills reached $2,200 a month, and the only job with hours flexible enough and pay high enough was this one. So she folded the degree away and learned instead the precise angle at which Victor preferred his newspaper. She learned that his daughter Maya took her oatmeal with exactly 1 teaspoon of honey, not 2. She learned that certain rooms in this house had doors that swallowed sound, and certain rooms did not. She had learned too much. For 3 years she had kept what she knew pressed flat inside her chest like a letter you write and never send. She told herself it wasn't her place. She told herself the consequences would fall on her, not him. She was practical. She was careful. She was a woman who understood that visible anger from someone like her in a house like this would be the end of everything she had held together with her bare hands. But she had made a mistake. 6 weeks ago, in the room at the end of the east hallway, the one with the heavy door, she had overheard a phone call. She had not meant to. She had been retrieving a cashmere throw that a guest had left draped over the back of a chair, and the door had been 2 inches open instead of closed, and Victor's voice had come through like smoke under a door frame. She'll never say anything, none of them do. She had stood very still in the hallway for 43 seconds. Then she had folded the throw, placed it on the chair, walked back downstairs, made the coffee. She had not slept properly since. What she had done in those 6 weeks, the careful, quiet thing she had built in the margins of her work hours, in the notes app of a cheap prepaid phone she kept in the inside pocket of her uniform, was not revenge. She had told herself that every single day. It was simply the truth, written down, documented, waiting. But she had never intended for a child to see it. She had never planned for Maya. Maya who noticed everything. Maya whose father looked through her like glass and whose eyes had learned, because of it, to see what most adults trained themselves to miss. Tonight, those eyes had seen the wrong thing. Or perhaps the right thing at exactly the right time. The Sinclair estate sat on 11 acres in Westchester County, 42 minutes from Manhattan by car. The main house had 14 rooms, a wine cellar that Victor had never personally entered, a kitchen with Italian marble countertops the color of cream, and a staff of 4: gardener, driver, chef, and Amina, each of whom received a non-disclosure agreement along with their first paycheck. Victor Sinclair had signed his first deal at 26. By 31, he controlled a private equity firm that specialized in what the financial press called workforce restructuring, a phrase that meant, in practice, walking into companies with 200 employees, stripping them to 40, and selling the remainder for 3 times what was paid. He was good at it. He was very good at it. And he had surrounded himself so completely with people who confirmed this, that he had long since lost the ability to hear any other frequency. He was 51 years old. He had been divorced once briefly, expensively, and without, as far as anyone could tell, any particular grief. His daughter Maya lived with him under a custody arrangement that gave her mother, a sculptor named Diane, every other weekend and school holidays. Maya had been deposited into this house at age 4 and had grown up inside it like a plant in the wrong climate, alive, but reaching sideways for light. Victor did not dislike his daughter. That would have required noticing her more consistently than he did. What he felt for Maya was the particular discomfort of a man who has always known how to perform competence and who finds, in the presence of a child who watches rather than performs, that the act no longer holds. She unnerved him. He showed this by being busy. Tonight's dinner was ostensibly a celebration, the close of a $380 million acquisition. The guests were finance men, mostly, their wives draped beside them like expensive accessories they had stopped noticing. There was champagne. There were 3 courses. There was the particular quality of conversation that exists only at tables where everyone already has everything and is therefore only talking to remind each other of it. Amina moved through it like water through stone. Plates appeared and disappeared. Glasses refilled at the precise moment before they went visibly empty. She had done this 200 times in this room. She knew which guests left their forks at angles and which ones placed them parallel. She knew that the man at the far left, a hedge fund manager named Gerald Prescott, would request Dijon mustard with his beef even though it was not on the table, because he always did, and she had already placed a ramekin of it at his elbow before he sat down. This was her competence. This was what $62,000 a year before taxes, before the $340 monthly she sent to her younger sister in Atlanta, bought. Invisibility, perfection, the right to remain. She had met Victor's second-in-command, a woman named Claire Harmon, once briefly at the edge of a corporate function she'd been asked to assist within the city. Claire had looked at Amina with the measured warmth of someone who has learned to perform care without expending it. She had said, "Victor speaks very highly of you." It had felt, somehow, like a warning. That was 14 months ago. It was Claire who had been on the other end of the phone call. Amina knew because she had, very carefully, over 4 weeks, matched the voice. She knew because Claire's name appeared in documents she had photographed, quietly, with the prepaid phone, in the room at the end of the east hallway during the 47 minutes each Thursday when Victor's chef took his break, and the house was at its most still. What those documents described was not complicated. It was the kind of thing that is simple to do and complicated only to explain away. A systematic pattern of wage theft across 3 subsidiary companies, altered employment contracts, workers, mostly immigrant women, mostly in warehouse and domestic labor roles, signed onto terms they had never agreed to in language that had been changed after the fact. $14,000 here, $31,000 there. Compounded across 800 workers over 6 years. The total figure, when Amina had sat down on the floor of her studio apartment in the Bronx and worked through the numbers herself, slowly, with a calculator, because she needed to be sure, was just over $4.8 million. She had sat with that number for 2 weeks before she did anything else. Then she had begun to write it down. But tonight was not supposed to be the night. Tonight she was supposed to serve the dessert, clear the plates, lock the kitchen at 10:30, take the train home. The envelope, the one containing the USB drive and the printed documents and the handwritten summary she had composed in 3 careful drafts, was supposed to go to the attorney she had contacted 6 days ago, a woman named Dr. Patricia Ose, who ran a workers' rights practice in Harlem and who had said, in a voice so calm it felt like solid ground, "Send me what you have. Don't tell anyone yet, and don't do anything until we speak again." The meeting was scheduled for Thursday. Tonight was Tuesday. And then Maya had reached across the table and grabbed Victor Sinclair's wrist, and the careful architecture of 6 weeks of silent, careful, dangerous preparation had cracked open like a fault line. Because Maya had seen what was in the dessert. Not the poison, there was no poison, not in the way that word conjures. What Maya had seen, from where she sat at the end of the table with her quiet, watchful eyes, was Amina's hands shaking when she placed the plate. And a child who has grown up watching adults perform normality learns, faster than any adult gives her credit for, exactly what a performance looks like when it's breaking. The question hanging over the table now, in the silence after Maya's voice, was not what was in the dessert. It was what Amina knew, and how long she had known it, and whether Victor, who had spent 25 years never looking directly at the people who served him, was finally going to have to look. Victor put the fork down. Not because he believed the child. He didn't, not yet. He put it down because the table was still silent and the silence had weight, and Victor Sinclair was a man who had spent his life reading rooms, and this room was telling him something his pride had not yet caught up to. He looked at Maya properly, the way he almost never did. She was still holding his wrist. Her grip was surprisingly strong for a child of 8, and she was not letting go. "Why?" he said. Not to the table, not to the room, to her, just to her. Maya didn't look at him. She was looking at Amina. And when Victor followed his daughter's gaze across the room to where his maid stood frozen beside the kitchen door, hands clasped, eyes fixed on a point just above the table, the particular stillness of a person who is trying not to exist, something shifted inside him. Not comprehension, not yet, but the first fracture of it. He had employed Amina for 6 years. He knew her name, her schedule, the coffee ratio she used, the way she said, "Of course, sir," to everything he asked. He had never once asked her a question that required more than 1 sentence to answer. He asked her one now. "Amina, what's in the dessert?" She didn't answer, but her hands, her careful, controlled, professional hands, were shaking. The answer came 3 hours later, in a way nobody at the table had prepared for. After Amina's silence, Victor had dismissed the guests, not rudely, but with the efficient finality of a man who needed a room cleared and knew exactly how to clear one. The chef was sent home. The kitchen was locked. Maya was supposed to go upstairs. She didn't. She sat on the bottom stair in her blue dress, velvet collar slightly askew now, and she watched through the banister as her father and Amina stood in the kitchen in the overhead light, the good light, the honest light, the kind that removes shadows, and the thing that had been held in for 6 weeks came apart. It did not come apart dramatically. That was what nobody watching would have expected. Amina reached into the inside pocket of her uniform and removed a small prepaid phone. She placed it on the marble counter. Then she removed a folded envelope from the same pocket. The envelope she had been carrying for 6 days, the one that was supposed to go to an attorney in Harlem on Thursday, and placed it beside the phone. She did not speak. She simply slid both objects across the counter toward him. Victor looked at the phone, at the envelope, then at her face. He opened the envelope. The documents inside were printed on standard copy paper, folded in thirds. There were 11 pages. The first page was a summary table, dates, company names, dollar amounts, employee reference numbers. The numbers were precise. The documentation was not the work of someone acting impulsively. It was the work of someone who had taken their time. Victor read for 4 minutes without moving. The first number he stopped at was $31,400. The name beside it was a warehouse worker in Newark named Francisca Mendez, 41 years old, contracted at $18.50 per hour, paid at $14.20 over a period of 22 months. The contract alteration was dated 3 weeks after she had signed the original. He turned to the second page, then the third. By the 6th page, his hand was on the counter and his posture had changed. Not collapsed exactly, but something in the architecture of his certainty had shifted. The way a building shifts before anyone on the street notices anything at all. He looked up at Amina. "Who else has seen this?" "One attorney," she said. "I have a meeting on Thursday." He was quiet, then, "How long have you had this?" 6 weeks. The silence was different now. Not the silence of a room waiting for him to speak. The silence of a man standing in a fact he had been inside of without knowing it. The way you can walk through a burning building for 100 yards before the smoke reaches your throat. He said the dessert wasn't poisoned, Amina said. "I dropped something in the kitchen when I was plating it, a ceramic shard. I couldn't tell if it had gone into the plate. I was trying to say something without." She stopped. Maya saw that I was frightened. Victor looked through the kitchen door to the staircase. Maya was still there, watching through the banister, her chin resting on the wood. He looked at his daughter for a long time. This is the part of the story where most people look away. The part where the man with every advantage on the table finally has to see what he built. If you know someone who has been quietly carrying the weight of what they know, share this with them tonight. They deserve to know someone sees them. By 9:15 the next morning, Claire Harmon's attorney had called. The call came to Victor's phone, which meant Claire already knew, which meant someone in the house, or adjacent to it, had said something. Or she had been watching more carefully than Amina had realized. The attorney's name was Douglas Fenn, and he spoke in the smooth, unhurried tone of a man who has had this conversation many times and won it every time. "Mr. Sinclair, my client is prepared to characterize any forthcoming documentation as the product of unauthorized access to private corporate records by a domestic employee. The non-disclosure agreement Ms. Diallo signed upon employment is very clear. My client would prefer to resolve this quietly." Victor said nothing. Any attorney taking this case on Ms. Diallo's behalf would be advised that the NDA includes a liquidated damages clause of $180,000 in the event of breach. My client does not wish to pursue that route, but she will, if necessary. $180,000. Amina's annual salary was $62,000. The math was not subtle. Victor hung up. He sat at his desk for 11 minutes. Then he called a number he had not called in 4 years. A man named Raymond Osai. a former federal investigator who had once helped Victor's firm navigate a regulatory review and who had said when it was over, "If you ever find yourself on the wrong side of something, call me before you call a lawyer." Raymond answered on the second ring. Victor said, "I think I've been on the wrong side of something for a long time, and I need to know how bad it is before Thursday." He did not tell Raymond about Amina's meeting yet. He needed one day. He needed to understand what he had signed, what he had approved, what he had been present for without watching. He needed to know whether the man whose name was on those 3 buildings in Manhattan had known, or had simply, for 25 years, chosen not to look. The answer, Raymond told him 2 hours later, was worse than either. He hadn't known, but he had built systems that made not knowing very easy. And in the law, Raymond said, those 2 things often end up in the same room. Amina, meanwhile, had gone home to the Bronx. She sat on the edge of her bed with her prepaid phone in her hand and Dr. Patricia Osai's number on the screen and did not press call, because it was 11 p.m. and because she had received at 9:47 that morning a text from a number she did not recognize that said only, "We know what you have. Think carefully." She stared at the message for a long time. Then she pressed call. Dr. Patricia Osai did not sound alarmed. This, somehow, was the most alarming thing. "I've been expecting something like this," she said. "It means the documentation is real enough to scare someone. That's good. That's exactly what we need it to be." She asked Amina 3 questions. She confirmed the meeting was still Thursday. She told Amina to send the file that night, encrypted, to an address she provided, and to keep nothing on the prepaid phone after that. "And the NDA?" Amina asked. "NDAs cannot legally cover up wage theft. They can try, they often do try, but they cannot hold. What you have is a pattern of fraud across multiple entities. That is a federal matter. Douglas Fenn knows this. He is hoping you don't." Amina exhaled, a long, slow exhale, the kind that releases something that has been held for weeks. "Will it work?" she said. "The documentation is strong," Dr. Osai said. "The question isn't whether it works. The question is whether you're ready for what comes after, because your name is going to be on this." "I know," Amina said. She had known since the beginning. She had known when she first pressed record on the prepaid phone in the East hallway. She had known when she sat on the floor of her apartment and worked through the numbers with a calculator. She had known when she folded the degree in Spelman and put it in a storage unit and told herself it was practical and not surrender. She had known, and she had done it anyway. Because there was a name on page 7 of that document. A woman named Lucille Ba, 29 years old, from Guinea-Conakry, working in a distribution facility in New Jersey, paid $12,000 less than her contract specified over 18 months, and Lucille Ba was Amina's cousin. Amina had not put that in any of the documents. It was not necessary. The facts were enough. But it was why. It had always been why. She sent the file at 12:14 a.m. Wednesday morning, encrypted, to the address Dr. Osa had given her. Then she deleted everything from the prepaid phone, placed it in a Ziploc bag, and put it at the bottom of her bag. Then she called her sister in Atlanta and talked for 40 minutes about nothing important. Their mother's garden, a film her sister had seen, a recipe she wanted to try and did not mention any of it. When she hung up, she sat in the quiet of her apartment and felt, for the first time in 6 weeks, completely calm. The meeting on Thursday was not what Claire Harmon expected. She had been told by Douglas Fenn, who had been told by Victor's assistant, who had relayed only the bare minimum, that there would be a conversation with a workers' rights attorney. She had dressed accordingly, Charcoal blazer, structured bag, the particular expression of a woman who has won this kind of meeting before and intends to win it again. What she had not been told was that Victor would be there, or that Raymond Osai would be seated beside Dr. Patricia Osai, not as opposing counsel, but as a former federal investigator who had spent the last 36 hours compiling a secondary evidence package from 3 of Victor's subsidiary companies. A package that, as he explained in a voice that contained no warmth and no hurry, had been forwarded that morning to the Department of Labor's Wage and Hour Division. Claire's attorney opened his mouth. "We'd advise you not to speak yet," Dr. Osai said pleasantly. The room was a conference room in a building in Midtown. There were 6 people at the table. There were printed documents in front of every seat. The documents were tabbed, color-coded, organized by company, by date, by dollar amount. There was a USB drive at each place setting. Amina was not in the room. She had been offered the option. She had declined. She had said to Dr. Osai, "She'll know it was me the moment she sees me. I don't need her to know I watched her fall. I just need her to fall." So instead she sat in a coffee shop 4 blocks away with her hands wrapped around a cup of tea and waited. Claire Harmon, 3 minutes into the meeting, asked for a recess. It was declined. What happened next was documented later in an article that ran in a financial industry newsletter under the dry, precise headline, "Executive Removed from Sinclair Capital Board Following Labor Department Investigation." The article was 400 words. It contained no drama. It did not need to. But the people in that room that Thursday described something the article could not capture. The way Claire's composure, so practiced, so total, left her face in stages, like a tide going out. First the eyes, which widened and then went very still. Then the jaw, which moved once as if preparing a sentence that never arrived. Then the posture, the immaculate, deliberate posture of a woman who had always understood that how you hold your body is how you hold your power, which softened, vertebra by vertebra, until she was simply sitting in a chair the way people sit when they no longer have anything to maintain. She did not shout, she did not cry. She simply became very small in a room that had been ready for her. Victor said one thing at the end. He looked at the documents in front of him, documents bearing the names of companies he had built and the names of workers he had never met, and he said, "I want to know the total amount, every worker. I want the full number." Raymond gave it to him. Victor wrote it down on the notepad in front of him. He looked at it for several seconds. Then he folded the notepad in half. "Start the process," he said, "all of them." Amina was not there to see it. But at 4:17 p.m., her phone lit up with a message from Dr. Osai that said only, "It's done. Go home." She sat with the phone in her hands for a long time. Outside the coffee shop window, the street moved the way streets do, continuous, indifferent, utterly unchanged by any single thing that happens inside the buildings lining it. She picked up her tea, finished it, left a tip she could not quite afford, walked to the train. 5 months later, Amina's mornings looked like this. She woke at 7 a.m. in the same studio apartment in the Bronx. She made coffee for herself, the way she liked it, with no particular precision required. She sat at the small table by the window and opened her laptop, and the document she opened was not a record of someone else's crimes. It was a draft curriculum for a workshop she was running on Saturday for 17 domestic workers in the Bronx and Upper Manhattan. Women who had NDA clauses in their contracts they didn't understand, wage agreements they had never fully read, rights they didn't know they had. She was not a lawyer. She was very clear about this. Dr. Osai was the lawyer. Amina was the woman who had been in the room, which turned out to matter more to 17 women on a Saturday morning than any credential. The folder in storage, the one with the Spelman degree, she had retrieved 3 weeks after the Thursday meeting. She had unfolded it on her kitchen table and looked at it for a long time. She hadn't framed it. It wasn't that kind of moment. She had simply placed it flat on the shelf above her desk, where she could see it while she worked. The $4.8 million restitution process was ongoing. It would take time. These things always did. Luz Elba had received her first payment, $9,400 in month 4. She had called Amina on a Sunday afternoon and they had talked for an hour, and neither of them had said the word justice, because the word felt too large and too borrowed for what the money actually was, which was the simple return of what had been taken. Victor Sinclair had stepped back from active management of 2 of the subsidiary companies. He had not disappeared, men like him rarely did, but something in him had changed in a way that people around him noticed without being able to name. He was quieter. He asked questions he had not previously thought to ask. He was seen on 2 separate occasions, eating lunch alone in the kitchen with Maya, the 2 of them at the small staff table rather than the dining room, and this, to everyone who worked in that house, was the strangest thing of all. Maya had started keeping a notebook. Amina knew this because Maya had told her, in the careful, deliberate way of a child who is used to not being heard and is learning, slowly, to trust that she might be. They had lunch together once, in the 3rd month, at a diner in Harlem that Amina chose, and Maya arrived at 40 minutes late because the car service had gotten lost. She'd sat down, spread butter on a piece of toast, and said, "I knew something was wrong because your hands were shaking. Adults' hands don't shake unless something is really wrong." Amina had looked at her. "You were right." "I know," Maya said, and ate her toast. Amina's story is not a story about poison. There was no poison. There was a ceramic shard, a shaking pair of hands, and a child who had learned, in the specific way that overlooked children learn, to watch the adults in the room with her whole attention. That attention saved Victor Sinclair's life, not from the dessert, but from the version of himself that could have gone on for another decade without ever looking at what he had built. The real danger was never on the plate. It was in the east hallway, in the room with the heavy door, in the 6 years of silence that had accumulated in a woman who was not supposed to be seen, and who had used every minute of that invisibility to see everything. Claire Harmon resigned the board in month 2. She did not issue a public statement, 2 sentences in a filing and then nothing. Amina had spent 6 years being the kind of person that powerful rooms forget to worry about. She forgot to forget herself. He thought silence from the overlooked was agreement. He had never considered that it might be preparation. If this story moved you, if you've ever been the person in the room that others looked through, share it tonight with someone who needs to know their quiet doesn't mean powerless. And if nobody has told you lately, the most dangerous person in any room is the one everybody forgot to watch.